Welcome back to Content That Grows. Today I'm excited to be joined by Jakub Rudnik. Jakub recently took over as Director of Content Marketing at ActiveCampaign, and previous to that, he led content marketing at Scribe, G2, and other companies. He's also a content and growth consultant and teaches digital journalism at DePaul University in Chicago. So as you can see from that, I'm super excited. A lot of relevant stuff to dig in today. And the main thing we're going to be talking about with Jakub today is scaling content at a startup. So Jakub, so excited to have you with us today.
Yeah, Nate, thanks for asking me to be on here. Good to chat with you.
Yeah, so to get started, I think would love to maybe just, I said, the topic is scaling content, but like the term scale gets thrown around a lot in content marketing. And so maybe just start by explaining a bit about what that phrase means to you and your team.
Yeah, so it's a little bit different at each stop. So at Scribe, we were a 2-person team. At ActiveCampaign, it's a 40-person marketing team. It's different, certainly, or like the scale of the scale maybe is different. But
sure.
For me, it's a volume of the content we're producing, a volume of the traffic that comes from that, volume of depends on what the company is, but for us it's trials and then conversions. Here at Scribe it was free users into paid, but scale for me is building one process with our content, getting something really refined, and then going and doing it dozens, hundreds, whatever the number that we need and is available to us. It's often for me been blog posts. We can do that really well. I have a great playbook there. So how do we get our team to create one, have an awesome playbook, and then go do as many of those as can provide a good impact for the business. So that's how I think of scale, and just going after one channel really, really fast and hard, and being as effective there as possible.
Yeah, I think that's great. You hit on one part that I know I've discussed with John Bonini when he was on, and maybe one or two others, is like, you mentioned sort of like getting the playbook set, like getting things figured out and scaling. And I think that that's such a huge part to that in what you're describing is you like a lot of people may say we're going to scale, but that just may mean like a lot of additional manual effort to try to do maybe not that much more versus scale. I think in the sense you're talking about and where it's most effective is when you really do have that playbook, and then you can really kind of rinse and repeat. You have a solid process behind it. You can really push. So I think that's great. It makes a lot of sense. How long do you think that takes? Because you kind of had the opportunity to join, like you said, different sized marketing teams, but you got to kind of get in to a couple different places and set it up. So like, is that like first 2 weeks, 2 months, 6 months? Like what do you think that typically takes?
Yeah, I think it's typically in that first, it depends on what you have in place, the team's knowledge and things. Typically in that first quarter to first half is where I'll see that really take off. Obviously want to do that as fast as possible. Like here at ActiveCampaign, we have 2 weeks of even like full-time onboarding across the company. So it's even slower, and there's, we're 800 people. There's just more processes, and kind of have to like pull back some of what exists to go forward. At Scribe, where we had, 8 blogs or 12 blogs on the site, I could just go and hire freelancers and build those systems really quickly. So it was more of like, 6 weeks if we were doing it correctly. So I think some of that is like how many times you've done it. When we did it once at G2 with a bunch of internal writers, had that playbook, but then moving it over to a one editor or freelancers, I had to shift a bunch of things. How do you do the invoicing, the payments, the contracts, all that was like a new layer I had to put on top. And so though the system of editing and publishing was pretty similar, we had to like change a bunch of the processes on who was doing it. So the operations shifted, and it probably added a month or so to really refine that process. Yeah,
I think that's a great point. Really, really interesting insights. So with that, it sounds like G2, I know for sure, and ActiveCampaign, familiar, used to be like 2 blocks away or something like that from the Sprout office. So we knew some folks there, familiar with that company. Like they're fairly like high speed, high growth companies. And so like now that you've had the opportunity to be at a few of those, like what would you say are some of the common roadblocks, bottlenecks, anything like that you kind of encountered along the way when you're trying to kind of build and scale? So obviously you just mentioned like, well, that, in this case I had to actually set up payment framework and contracts, stuff like that. But what else kind of impedes that, setting that up and getting that running?
Yeah, I think especially in bigger, and even, I'll take this away, not even bigger companies, every company like blogs or content's super visible, right? It's there on the homepage of that blog. The CEO just comes and clicks over and looks and is like, why is this image this way? Or why are we doing it? Like the little details that don't matter to your readers that much will matter to people internally. So you're like sometimes fighting those early on, like at Scribe with no traffic, again, no domain authority. It was that buy-in. Will this work? Will we see traffic? Will we see this? So you're just fighting to show some early signs. Here at ActiveCampaign, we have this awesome brand team. We have video, all these, but if you want to create something that goes across multiple departments, suddenly there's a lot of checks and balances, and there's just, you're working with longer sprints and timelines and things. So it depends on those, but a lot of times it's just dependencies. That's what I like to rip out, is like, I want me and our small team to be able to do as much of this as possible. I want to self-serve our images. If we're even creating anything custom, I want to be able to go work with that contractor directly. And so obviously as the company gets bigger, you have to work with more folks, and that's good things. But wherever I can rip out dependencies on others to just streamline, that's my best case scenario.
I think I certainly resonate with what you said around just sort of the cross-departmental stuff. Certainly experienced that a bit at Sprout, and when I was consulting with some companies, and obviously we work with a lot of companies now and see varying degrees of teams that want to review stuff and all kinds of things there. And so I think there's a lot of value, like you said, in as much creating a lane as much as you can to do that stuff. And then where you can't, that's where I've kind of been a big advocate for, like, okay, well, if you can't have a contract designer and you can't have a dedicated designer on your team or on your squad or whatever, it is for your company, then you just have to figure out, like, what's the process and lead time that I need to, like, put this way in advance so that they don't have a chance of being a roadblock to staying on my publishing cadence and whatnot. And so I think there's a lot of good stuff there. And then I think the other thing I would love to hear your thoughts is, like, I've been a big proponent of, like, having your own lane kind of execute the way you need to, but, like, it still has to fit inside of brand voice, and style guides, and still obviously you don't want, like, here's our content roadmap going this direction and, like, the overall marketing strategy is not totally aligned, so it has to still kind of fit within the overall mesh of what you're trying to do. So I'd love, within that vein, just your thoughts on how you kind of peel away those things, give yourself autonomy, but then still stay inside of the broader marketing strategy.
Yeah, I think with ActiveCampaign, it's a great experience here on how I'm aligning as the leader of that content team over to product, over to sales, and trying to take, I think there's been a lot of progress even since I've been here on all rowing in the same direction broadly, but then, for us on content doing that, and it's never every piece of content will make everybody happy, right? We have different layers of sales and things that just will never fully satisfy or give enough content. But that's for me to try to take in all those requests and needs and build a roadmap for the team so they can go and create those pieces. And I think that I mentioned it, but once you have the best thing you can do for, like, that alignment, and I think to remove some of that oversight is, like, to see those results. The second we showed at Scribe, like, we put $1 in and 7 months later we break even, and 2 years out, this will be 7x the revenue we put in. Like, people were just down to throw more money at it, and we just had so fewer, like, oversights or, like, little Slack messages, why we're doing this, right? That trust is built by really showing the numbers on the other side, and that's obviously traffic, but then those like true revenue, like the value to the company. So I mean, 5 months in, like I'm still proving those things at ActiveCampaign. So there's going to be more of that oversight, and you'll have to have more of those conversations, just build trust as both like one-to-one with other teams and show that you're moving in the right direction, or you're taking what they're considering into action. And then on the other side, like when the graph is up and to the right, when the company is growing through your content and those efforts, like then people will trust and actually go to you and what do you advise here, or how will you think about it? But early on, it's more on that order taking and trying to appease and really show a lot of good efforts. I think a lot of content leaders face that.
Yeah. I think that definitely resonates. Kind of building on that, and going back to what you were saying about Scribe, like what are some of the tips? So you mentioned sort of like modeling out when you were at Scribe, but like outside of that, like how do you keep leadership satisfied and aligned while you and your team are like executing in the beginning stages, or for several months? Like any other tips you have around that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, an example here at ActiveCampaign, a sales leader came over and like, we're working on these couple of verticals. And so trying to find a couple of pieces that can be, I don't know if they're even going to be a high impact right away, but they're a good visibility piece. Like let's spend a bunch of time making this like nonprofit specific piece, really polished kind of pillar that they can go and use over and over. Don't be so niche that they can only use it like with one customer, right? Like the best case is something that they can use across a big group or an entire team can use over and over. But those type of little, like, even if that's a little bit outside of what I want to do this month, one piece or this little bit of effort can buy us like some goodwill and some buy-in. So I'm not going to do something that will have no impact, but I can do something with like 20% less to give the sales an asset. I think over communication, like for me with the projections at Scribe, I probably like overestimated traffic a little bit, but then we were underestimating our conversion rates and like what revenue would come out the other side. So I try to be conservative in that regard, especially. So when we're overperforming and we're breaking even much earlier and the ROI is there, like that was eye-opening, really excited. So I try to do that on the projection side, not to like, I don't know, sandbag or something, but just to you don't want to promise the world and you're having a positive ROI, but like feel like you're failing. So I think there's a couple of things in there. There's probably others as well, but those are some things that worked for me. Yeah,
I think that's some great advice. And the first thing you mentioned, I love and also just totally agree with and have advised people to, kind of gotten a question several times over the years, like how do you have a plan, but like strike that balance between like not having your plans be derailed, but also not being like totally resistant to timely things or like requests from the organization. And my answer is always like, you just have to have a slot, and anytime you don't have a request, then you just fill that slot, but you have this like little optional pocket in your plans. And so I think your comment makes a ton of sense. Like, yeah, let's put one in there for this month and give sales what they need and be a good partner and not get too fixated on exactly what we're trying to accomplish, and realize that we want to help the business overall, and there's a lot of stuff there. So yeah, I think those are some really, really good points. And I think I wanted to touch on it because I think there's just a lot of people deal with that, like those questions. And if I put myself in the shoes of a CEO, especially in the last 18 months, and managing cash a little more closely, then I think there's that question of like, but how do we know you're on the right track? How do we know this will actually turn the corner and do what you're saying it'll do? And a lot of those things that are tough for content marketers and SEO folks to answer a lot of times.
Sure. And I mean, on top of that, everyone's saying like AI is going to kill content marketing, right? Like Google, like there's also, even at Scribe where there's been a huge success, they've made money in 15 months of doing content marketing. There's still should we be doing this anymore? And it's growing, like pro conversions growing every single month. And I know they're still like having those conversations of like, how hard do we continue to push? Is this something that we should stop doing? And, most companies don't even have that like break even. If you're a Series A, if you just launched a content program, like you might be 6 months from even being able to feel like you can prove anything. So I think that extra goodwill, I think we build in early on close to like 80% of our time is kind of accounted for, but that extra 20% to account for others. And I want to use that for my plan, and I know what I'll do if we have that available. But I build that in for those things that pop up, or helping give sales an asset or whatever else.
Yeah. Great. So then, kind of the last parts I want to touch on for this topic around scaling, before we get into the next section, is like when you're talking about creating like hundreds to thousands of pieces of content in a year, what kind of content are you referring to? Is it like all blogs? Is it a mix of content types? And then how do you also account for like the aging and updating of articles that are just maybe a bit older?
Yeah, a really good question I feel like I don't get is that, like, how do you deal with decay? So yeah, when I'm talking about that volume of pieces, definitely in like most of my experience is doing that on the written side. So mostly blog, you'll have obviously, like we have a glossary here at ActiveCampaign that has pretty good traction. So I've built there. That one is like never going to convert a ton, but they're easier to write. We can use AI to create a bunch of the content and polish it up ourselves, and kind of I like to go where there's traction already on the site or with the company. But here also we have like localized content. So we've got content in 5 other languages. We've got YouTube, and there's content being created all over the company that's even outside of my realm. And then the accounting. So like coming into ActiveCampaign, we have a pretty successful blog. I think at some point we were $250K a month, and it's just been kind of decaying over 18 months or something like that, partly because of our negligence, partly because of algorithm changes and stuff. We have a bunch of traffic. It's not always relevant. So coming in, I'm just trying to fill a ton of gaps that I see, like at Scribe and other stops, like every software list converts really well. We have 2 of them, like best email marketing software, of course, best CRM software, and then we don't have anything in between those. So like, let's fill in all those gaps, all those other terms that people call us, all these other longer tail pieces. Let's just go and create these. They're pretty templatized. We're creating them at scale, big volume of these. A bunch of them aren't going to get to page 1 on their own, even though we have a really good domain authority, even though we ran our playbook. So we're going to have to come back to those maybe even this quarter, if not, within the next 6 months. And so my play is like, let's push a ton of content. Let's show Google a bunch of positive signals. Let's do things the right way now that we have this new playbook. At the same time, I've got somebody even optimizing some of our old content that we do want to keep. So that's like a 2-pronged effort to go create really fast, but then even optimize. But even as we've shifted from to my second full quarter here, we're doing more of that optimization, even of some of that newer content, finding some of that expertise. Do we have any original data we can use? Like, let's do that interlinking more effectively. Let's build those custom images that we skimped on the first go. Like, let's go republish and things. So, and I think over time will change. Like, if you go to Scribe, we never spend any time. We spent very little time in the first year going backwards because it was all net new, trying to build that base of like, what would we need to get to, thousands of signups a month. Now that they're actually spending that time going back, and we have 40% of the content has never reached page 1. So let's cut that to 30 and then to 20. So it's a matter of like, when I look at what ActiveCampaign is, where we want to get to, we don't have enough content and the right content to get anywhere near those goals. We just have to have new. But once that's there, we can spend more time making sure that content is as effective as possible. Yeah,
I love that. And I think, I think the most important underpinning of all of that is like your the philosophy that like nothing's permanent, and that's what I've told people for forever. Like, there's just for a lot of people, there's this desire to like make, whether it's like a website update or whatever, like just sit and tinker and tinker and tinker until they feel like it's perfect, and then publish, and then don't touch it for 6 months until they're frustrated with it, and do that process again. And it's like, it's not a magazine, you know, like it's not going to the press, the printer press, whatever. Like, just put it up and then change. And obviously, you know, like ActiveCampaign, you can't just go like change the homepage headline or whatever, and like there's consequences at that level of scale. But like, just roll with it, publish the content, you know, get it out there, and then go back, see what is working, what's not, what's on page 2, like refine from that. So I love that philosophy that's kind of driving a lot of that for you. It's great.
And it's so against my journalism background. Like, it's so hard
Right.
for me to roll back and say, no, we don't need to do that. No, we don't even like copy edit some of our blogs. Like, maybe we do a peer review. But I used to do 3-4 layers of editing at G2 because we had a huge team. And I'm a journalist. I need to do this. And then as I've gone, I keep stripping away layers of oversight and checks, and just to keep moving faster. And none of it's really impacted the results on the other side. So I for anybody like debating that, like, you can always go faster when it's not, you know, a PDF or an ebook or something. Like, if it's a blog or a glossary page or whatever, or landing page, like, publish, iterate, right? Like, just go faster.
Yeah. So let me dig in real quick before we get into the next section. You just mentioned about, like, you know, journalism background and stripping out layers of review. How, in terms of like your playbook or whatnot, like, how do you keep everyone like on like tone, voice, like any of that kind of stuff? You know, if you're kind of peeling away some of those layers, like, what's your tactic to kind of keep everything on track there? For sure.
And I probably push less on the voice and tone in some ways, and like its general ideas. We're building a style guide as we go, but not like the depths like I built at G2, like very simply the highest level what we need. And it's probably less than most companies would want, especially at ActiveCampaign size. But like, for me, getting the right keyword and having people understand how we format a certain style of blog, so having those templates up front. And when we were working at Scribe, like with freelancers, here's the headers that you're using, here's your core keyword and your other 3. The upfront work to build a really nice brief was kind of the key for us. We started to then use, you know, even if we didn't have this robust style guide, which freelancers or even your writers may never read, or they'll skim once and then they don't think about it. So it's like providing those really clear examples has been more impactful than building out all that documentation for me. Like, this is the perfect blurb for ActiveCampaign like in a software list. Like, this is the structure that we want, and here's the tone, and we show that. And writers, I feel like, look and emulate at that great piece of content, right? So we just provide those, like, we really like this, or we've never done this, but here's 3 companies that have done it really well. And then, I mean, I think we're still developing our voice too, so maybe that's why I've been able to skimp on it at ActiveCampaign, as we're kind of rethinking who we are. But those type of pieces, I use examples more, I think, and then again, that brief when you're working with freelancers. So I don't know, there's probably other folks I should learn from, honestly, on the brand side, but or like the voice side. But like at Scribe, it was, we're talking to this person, here's the problem we're solving. And I think that problem focused push towards the writer was really impactful in getting the right content.
Yeah, cool. And even what you just said, again, just supported the prior point, which was there are some people who would literally not be publishing anything right now because the style guide at ActiveCampaign isn't set yet. And you just said,
totally.
Well, you know, we're building it, but we're going to keep going, and you know, if we have to go back, we'll go back, you know. So just supported the prior point. So
our readers just don't care, you know. Sorry, I read something on Ahrefs the other day, and just because I looked something up, and I bounced out of it in 15 seconds, but I got my answer, and I didn't care about what the word language is. I got my answer. And so most content needs that. They don't care about how one piece connects to another. They're probably not spending time on 2 things. So I don't know, let's be as helpful as possible and write as cleanly and as simply, and that will be more impactful than like what language we use, I think, to a lot of extent.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so let's kick over into the final 4, hit the same 4 questions we ask all our guests. So excited to kick this off with you. Just love to have you share, like, what's a recent success or learning that you've had?
Yeah, we just pruned, 530 blogs of our 800 blogs or something. Awesome. Our Ahrefs graph is going to be really fun really soon because we're already seeing the pages recognized kind of going down and the traffic starting to go up. So it's the first time that I've had this big of a prune. We did a little bit of it at G2, but we didn't have the traffic or success at that point. So this is like the biggest one for me. I've seen a million case studies. I'm sure you've even worked on these, but I've never done it to this scale. So, but we're seeing those results kind of immediately on a lot of pages. So it's really fun to be a part of it for the first time.
Yeah, it is fun. It's rare, I think, like you said, to have a case to really do a really big lopping off of a bunch of content versus systematically pruning over time. But I've never seen it do anything other than what you're describing right now. Crawl budget is still very much a real thing, and how much time is there, and really prioritizing the indexation of your most important stuff continues to matter. So that's cool. That's good to hear. Second question, if you're a company, what role does content play in the overall marketing strategy?
Yeah, for a long time it'd been kind of an internal agency. Somebody needs this, we publish. Someone needs this, we make a video. There's still some of that, and I'm trying to get away from some, but the shift why I came in and is to create or capture more demand. It's to be a part of the demand generation group. We also hired a demand gen leader who's definitely way more versed on paid and doing things, and we're collaborating a ton together. But for me, it's let's go find people that are ready to buy right now, and let's be the first result and the best result and give them the best information. I think there's other spots where we're now going to move into more of that, demand creation side, like the live video stuff like this, or having webinars where we're giving people information and being real thought leaders. We're starting to do original research. We brought someone in who's got a ton of experience there. So it'll be more of that demand creation, but right now let's just capture everything. We're in email marketing, CRM, marketing automation, really established spaces where there's already a ton of demand. People aren't happy with their solutions often, so there's a lot of room for us to go grab that existing demand.
Yeah. Awesome. And then, we talked about a bit of keeping leadership aligned and sort of time it takes and everything. But, more specifically, how does your company define success for you and your team? Is it traffic, revenue, anywhere in between? What's that for you?
Yeah, certainly traffic, trials, revenue. That's the basic funnel of success. Obviously, it's slightly different at each channel, and there are different stages. But we're definitely looking at our, how much traffic we have, the traffic to the right pages, and then what, the funnel from there. I think there's a ton of work at ActiveCampaign to figure out, sometimes we lose a ton of traffic, nothing happens on the other side of the funnel. And other times we're growing traffic, so it's figuring out that onboarding experience. How do we make that more custom to people depending on what page they're on, what stage they are, all that stuff. So there's a ton more there, but those are the three metrics at the high level.
And since you have experience across a couple of different, was that pretty much the same for Scribe, G2? Was there any difference in those?
Yeah, so Scribe, yes. We had that free user, so free users kind of just replace trials, and though it's a different motion, you want to, a free user can be free forever, but then they'll, send it within their company and they'll take it to their next company, where a trial leaves you in 14 days. So there's differences there, but it's a pretty similar funnel. G2 is a really wonky thing. We had a CMO come over from HubSpot, and I learned a ton from him, but we had some vanity metrics, certainly, and it cost us. And it was early in my career where I got really good at building traffic, but there was no focus on revenue at all. We thought about how to push people from a blog to a G2 category page, right? The CRM software or Salesforce profile. So we were measuring that, but there was no goals around it. We did write a bunch of content that was pretty far from our core product. We weren't pushing anybody towards our branding packages. It was really trying to use SEO to boost the category pages kind of indirectly, and it led to a bunch of problems. We grew the team really fast, and then half the team was laid off over 6 months because we went from nothing to 1.5 million visitors, but the ROI wasn't proven out. And I think there was a bunch of value, but we weren't showing it in the right way, and obviously that leads to a ton of attention. So that was like my biggest learning coming away from that, is like I have to know how the time I'm spending, the team, all of our work is impacting. So that's been the biggest change for me, is we didn't have that there, and it caused a lot of problems.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, obviously helpful, even though it's kind of tough, helpful to have that learning early on. And Amy Lexa was one of our early guests on the podcast in season 1, and I think she was maybe after you or overlapped a little bit, but that's when we kind of talked about that shift from like just going for all traffic to like kind of the shift that she was a bit more of a part of within all of that. So
totally. Yeah, G2 had these different stages where it's all category, no top of funnel content, like we kind of think of, then this massive push to like 2,000 articles over 6 months or something absolutely silly. And then they've pruned that back. They've done a lot of like really programmatic stuff that's been very good. And you can see that they're focused on like value added content, like content that's really moving the needle on the like ROI wise, rather than just traffic for traffic's sake. And so G2's had these different stages that are very different, like every 18 months.
Yeah. I actually distinctly remember that phase, because I mean, obviously we're Chicago companies, and like, I don't know, a 6-7 minute walk between the two offices, and so it was like just kind of word got around, and it just was like, what's going on over there? Like they're just like hiring 1 million writers and just cranking out massive amount of content. And obviously there was like the argument that there was just so much green space because you're covering every single software category. But from the outside, it was a bit like, what's the plan, with that? So,
and I think kind of totally fair. Like, what was the plan? I think our plan was like get to 1 million people in the first year. Like, no matter what, that was the top level. And so you have to have alignment. I think we had alignment to the CMO, but that didn't go across the rest of the business, and obviously that's a problem. So, yeah. I think it's a funny thing that you were kind of a doorstep away hearing that, because I've heard that from so many folks that it was like this little blip in content or SaaS content.
Yeah. All right. And then lastly, what's your least favorite marketing conversations happening on social channels right now, and why?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly like just AI overload. Could do without seeing all of that. I think like the SEO is dead is always like, that will get me out of I haven't posted in 2 weeks if I see, or SEO is dead because of AI, like that will get me posting for a few days. I think in this one, I'm probably too far on, and like you just had Justin on, who's really good, but like the content distribution stuff is correct to some extent, but I think there's like a push so far in the other direction. Like we need to create one thing and it should be everywhere. And to my first point about that scale is like, I think a lot of people trying to do content for the first time or trying to scale, they like see that they're not having, say, SEO results. And so then they're like, well, distribution and repurposing is going to be our play, right? We'll work less hard, get more, but then they're publishing their blog and then they're trying to do the white paper with that. And then they're doing all the social channels and short form video and all this, and they're a 1 or 2 person team. So they're like spreading so thin across so many things. It's like, here's the 10 or 30 item checklist for distribution, but you don't have the resources or even the knowledge of those channels to go do those really well. Yeah. So like we try to put everything on Twitter and LinkedIn, whatever, at G2, and that was a big waste of time. I wish we just had that 10% of our quarter back, because we got no results for that. That could have been more articles or, a better like a lead magnet or something. So I don't think it's wrong. I think it's like the right theme. There's a lot of purpose to it, like especially when you're doing like with this podcast, we should be repurposing it and using it in short form. So like that one play, awesome, but then you try to turn that into a blog that nobody reads, and it's like that has gone really far. And I think there are people like pushing too far, and that's just like a lack of understanding from the people that are latching onto that with like the thought leaders who do mean really well and do know how to use a lot of channels. So that's one that I'm a little skeptical of how far, like how effective that is, especially when you're talking small content teams.
Yes. All right. Let's dig in on that for a minute. I think at the high level, totally agree. Like the balance that's needed, and we've talked a fair amount about this. I posted quite a bit on LinkedIn in some form, and I think that you're absolutely right. So we do a little bit of like distribution or like repurposing for some clients. So like, hey, we're already in here creating this content. We'll go ahead and create social content around it, like just to make sure you're distributing. But a lot of the, a lot of the conversations with clients at earlier stage companies are like, we have like 150 followers, or whatever. And you're like, okay, yeah, that's probably not the best use of time or your budget or, some of that. So I totally agree that that's a factor. And I think the other is, there's software out there that like you can drop in one video or one post or whatever, and it like just automatically repurposes it into like 10 or 15 different channels and formats, and like can auto publish for you. And it's like this easy button kind of solution. And that doesn't really work either. And so that's where I think you and I are aligned, is that we've said like, you like there's power in repurposing and distribution because you don't want to just be on this hamster wheel of creating new, and there's like value in what you've created. But like start with 1, 2, maybe 3 channels that make the most sense, that your audience is on, and like focus there. And so I guess it's a long way of saying I agree with you, and I think that there's a balance that's needed. And in some ways it kind of reminds me of like the gating content debates, and like for a long time that was just like these really strong opinions in one direction or the other. And the reality is like it's kind of dependent on the content and the company and what the intent is and how much your audience cares about it and what you're going to do with that, and the value exchange and all that. Like it's just very nuanced. And so I think there's a lot there, but I'd agree that within some of the social channels, a lot of the rhetoric has maybe gone a bit far in what it's expecting you to do for repurposing.
Yeah, I think the like 2 to 3 channels is like a perfect recommendation. Like nail those, right? There's just so much nuance. There's an algorithm for everything that you're working against, right? You like need to master how to position. I just think of like all the blogs we write that just don't make any sense. Like I wouldn't expect to see those as a TikTok video. I wouldn't expect to see them on Twitter, right? Nobody clicks a B2B software link on Twitter anyway. So you're just like, how are you going to do this? I don't know. I just really like focusing. When I've focused extremely on a channel or two, that's where you understand those little tiny details. And then every effort, like on our blog, because we're so focused there, goes so much further. So like, it's not that we're doing one thing and we're getting to save a bunch of time by being on all these other channels. Is that like we've like perfected our playbook on one area. That means that every time we do it, it's going to be faster, and every time is going to be a little bit more effective because you've built a bigger audience there, right? Once SEO is working, you go to page 1 right away. So like, once you get to that hundreds of articles that are really performing, everything's easier for you. Same thing when you have 50,000 followers, every tweet gets better, every link, post gets better. So when you really dedicate to 1 or 2, you see bigger results down the road. So I'm with you.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So before we wrap up, anything else, around, scaling content for companies, or anything else in the final 4 we just touched on that you want to add before we wrap up?
Yeah, we talked for half a second, but the AI stuff, like we are using it to publish. I think what content marketers should be thinking about is like how they differentiate themselves. So we're trying to build in expertise, get original data, quotes from folks, even just using Hero, but our customers are talking to experts like, in the email field. So that's the type of thing that I think there will be other ways to do that I haven't even thought of or others haven't. But how do you differentiate when there's just a mountain of content already published but coming? I think that's like the thing that you, whoever is listening, should be thinking about as what differentiates your content from others. Because even ActiveCampaign with a 90 domain authority and a ton of traffic, we're fighting against a lot of people creating the same content. Yeah. So we need to find that way. And especially if you're at a startup, you're really going to have to differentiate. So I would call that out as a last takeaway.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So for any prior episodes you'd like to check out or for details on this one, visit 10speed.io/podcast. You can find the library of everything there. And be sure to like and subscribe on the channels that you prefer. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Jacob, thanks so much. It was a great conversation. Love kind of talking about all things scaling content. It was fun.
Yeah, thanks, Nate, for having me. Good to see you again. Chat soon.